Simulcast of the Neil Haley Show, and also Fridays with Frank. First with our host, Paul Hollis, author of the Hall Man series and owner of Hall Man Publishing, and Frank Fiore, host of Fridays with Frank. Frank, what's going on? How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good.
Our guest today is East Forrest. He's going to talk about his new documentary, Music for Mushrooms. East, thanks for stopping by. How are you?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me.
All right. So tell us, specifically enough how this all started for you.
It started by getting introduced to mushrooms many, many years ago. 15 years ago, I had a really powerful, transformative experience with, things falling apart in my life, things falling apart in the world. It was back in the financial crisis, Occupy Wall Street. I was in New York City, and I think I was just looking for some answers and stumbled into some alignments between music and a process with psychedelic mushrooms that just honestly changed my life. And I started wanting to make music that could help guide inner processes, meditation, psychedelic shamanic processes and stuff. I just got into this. And I just started seeing over and over again how it was really helping people with a lot of just stuff that maybe they've been working on in therapy for 10 years. And they'd say like, wow, I'm really starting to make some progress here with just a few nights of this kind of work. And so I just kept at it. And we made this movie because I wanted to tell a broader story of other people's story, not just my story. And so the Music for Mushrooms film is meant to hopefully inspire people to say that, look, inner work, it matters. And right now it matters. And I think the story we're being told is that it's a top-down thing, like the election or something like that. That'll solve our problems. And it's not that that isn't important, but I think a message I'm trying to put out there is that you are needed and your internal process actually matters. Like change happens in the world from the inside out.
Okay. All right. Go, Frank, with your question.
Well, a little bit. We were doing the same exact thing in the '60s, but we were dropping mescaline and listening to the Moody Blues. So.
Yeah. Yeah. This is, go back a couple thousand years, and I think we've been doing this as part of being humans for maybe forever.
And is legalization of mushrooms in some parts of the United States? Where are they legalized?
It's moving along. Yeah, there's some decriminalization efforts that have happened in places like Oakland, California, or Denver. Of course, in Oregon, there's some medicalized use now through clinics. And this is really the vanguard of where things are at legally. And most people project that over the next few years, it will become more and more sort of like how cannabis went, and it's continuing to move through the states, and it's going to happen. It's useful stuff. It's really reclaiming something I think we've been using as people for a long time. It was in 1970 with the Controlled Substances Act, Richard Nixon, when all this stuff got shut down and scheduled, not just mushrooms, but a lot of psychedelics. And there was research happening before that, but it's all now coming back. And like I'm doing a research project with UCSF, Dr. Robin Carhart Harris, and they're studying music and mushrooms and set and setting. And it's a new field that's starting to pick up a lot more steam.
All right. So let's kind of, delve into Paul's question. Now, Paul, were you ever involved with mushrooms back in the day in Europe when you were hunting down terrorists, Paul?
Not mushrooms, but I actually did distill LSD in the chem lab in college. So there's that. But I'm actually wondering, East. I actually know the answer to this, but I want to know. I want to get your perspective on how does music play a role in the psychedelic healing experience?
Yeah, it's fundamental. I mean, if you look at most indigenous ceremonies, all the ones I've experienced firsthand, they all use music as the central guide, whether it's a Lakota sweat lodge or a San Pedro ceremony, ayahuasca ceremony. In ayahuasca, for instance, they call the songs, Icaros or the songs, as the mechanism that's bringing forth the spirit of the ayahuasca. It's the music and the songs that are guiding and calling that forth. And so we can see that in a lot of these ceremonies, music is one of the only things going on besides, the structure of it, like how we're sitting in the room and so forth. And it's just showing us what a primary guide that is. And so in many ways, in sort of the modern psychedelic renaissance, whether it's ketamine clinics that are happening legally or otherwise, it's not being talked about as much. But music's almost like the afterthought in a lot of these clinics. And for me, I'm kind of waving my hand saying like, this is not an afterthought. We should actually be thinking about this a lot because it has a huge influence on the experience. And it can really, I also think it's the most democratized thing we can put out in the world for all the people who are curious and probably going to do this stuff. Like, look, mushrooms grow on the ground in places and people know what they're doing. They might just be imbibing because they want to. And I'm like, well, how do we help them have a more positive journey or experience from a harm reduction point of view? And I think music is something they can just hit play on, and it can have a massive impact on it being a positive experience for them.
So making this documentary, what did you learn most?
Mostly it's hearing other people's stories about what's going on in our lives, that everyone is struggling in different ways, and a lot of us hide that and bury it. And I think we think we're all kind of unique and maybe isolated, but it's like, wow, we're all going through a lot of stuff right now. This is like a time of massive stress and transition, and we all are going through that. So in that way, you know, we share a lot in our human experience. The crossover of what we feel emotionally is we have that so much in common. And I found that to be kind of like a kryptonite to the polarization that we're also feeling. It's like we're going so far apart. I'm like, well, where do we cross over? And I think it's in these emotions and like what it means, like what we all go through that we kind of hide and bury. And I was just seeing that over and over again. And it can kind of bring us together when we lean into like felt experiences.
Right. All right.
The relationship with Ram Dass, how did that develop, and how do you work with him on that?
So Ram Dass and I got linked up in 2018, and I went out to his place in Maui and recorded him, asked him some questions. I was there for about a week, and I put it to music to an album that became just called Ram Dass. And I didn't know it at the time. He died just about 2 years later, and it ended up being his last recorded teachings. And it was so powerful because if Ram Dass had a stroke and he had difficulty speaking, he had aphasia, but it was all up there in his head. He's trying to put it into words. And by recording it and putting it into music, you know, his pauses, these long pauses in between the words, actually became an asset because I could move the phrases around to the rhythm of the music. And then when you're listening to it in a song, you just hear the flow of his thoughts. It's almost like he awakened in the music. It unlocked his wisdom that I think was a little harder to attach to or read because of his aphasia. And so it was just this really amazing experience. Those songs have really spread around the world, and I think people resonate them because he had a great ability to like just distill like spiritual ideas into really approachable, almost like micro stories or micro teachings with a little bit of humor and a little bit of poetry. And each song, I was just blown away by his skill, really.
Right. And so more about the music. Ram used the spirituality in that music, it sounds like.
Yeah, you know, the music, he was just speaking to me in a room, and so I added the music after. I like composed, kind of scored what he said. Anyway, wrote songs to each little teaching. There's 14 songs, and it's things like dark thoughts, or there's one about nature. There's this idea called mind karma, like what is that? And so they kind of just explore different little ideas each song.
Oh, okay.
Is there a particular genre of music that you use with psychedelics?
You know, it's there isn't a genre that I could say it's just this. It's a bit cross genre, but I have found certain techniques work for sure. Like I started playing music for people to guide them through that experience back in 2008 through kind of making music for myself, and my buddy just started setting up circles with people, and he just kept doing it and kept doing it. And over time, you know, we worked with thousands of people, and you learn a lot about, hey, if I do sort of these things musically, that seems to be working, and this kind of stuff isn't working as well. And I started to just build a musical language, and you know, weaving in field recordings and live looping and longer form songs and mostly instrumental. And if I do sing, I'm not using many words, so it's not kind of like waking up that language part of your head. We just got a lot of different techniques that we could weave in there, and there wasn't a lot out there from a modern point of view, like people making music for this space. And So I think, 15 years later, the world's changed a bit. Our culture has changed where more people are looking into this as a solution, perhaps for them, maybe as part of a solution. And we haven't really changed what we've been doing. And I think we're just sort of aligning a bit more with the cultural winds.
You definitely are aligning to them. And what do you think of now younger people today getting more introduced to mushrooms? What are you seeing there?
Honestly, I'm seeing it less that it's a bunch of younger people. Younger people are always into this stuff. It's older people. I'm seeing a lot of baby boomers and different. It's a generational span of people now giving things like this a second look and seeing it more legitimized by the science they're seeing, by people like Michael Pollan writing a book about it, and the curiosity has gone way up.
Oh, okay. All right, Frank, what other questions do you have?
You have any examples like who would approach you and what kind of particular not illness, but whatever the problems they're having, which ones would help much better with your approach to the music and using the psychedelics?
Well, just to state that, like, I'm not healing anybody, and I'm just playing a role in this process that they're doing their own work. So I'm kind of, the music is a big influence on guiding them through that process. And many times I don't know what is going on with them. I'm just there, especially like when I make an album, called Music for Mushrooms. Also, it's just out there in the world, and I hear stories afterwards of like, what's going on with them. But it can help a lot with depression, anxiety, and that can be related to anything going on in your life. Grief, sometimes trauma, if done well. That's, I think, helpful to have some help with that one, because that can be tricky space, on your own. But it's not wholly prescriptive to say, these are the things, it uses on label or off label. It's mysterious, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah, I'm sorry.
sure. Yeah, that's it. I'm just saying, like, I can't really say exactly.
Okay.
When
Now, go, Frank.
when we were experimenting back in the 60s and 70s, the Moody Blues was a music that we always liked to listen to because they had an inner message if you really listen to it correctly. And have you found that kind of music is very useful in your therapy?
I think, like, what I've been finding is, like, maybe there's sort of two different directions of the psychedelic experience, and one's a bit more external and one's a bit more internal. And I'm not judging either. I'm just saying that, like, there seems to be a deeper level of influence and power that you can discover in yourself when you kind of just give it space to work with you, and you're not moving around, and maybe it's a darker space versus a lighter space. There's not a lot of external stimuli, and of course that makes, like, your internal life and experience louder. And people are often really surprised by the power of that experience. I mean, I've heard many times people say things like, look, I've taken mushrooms multiple times in my life, had some amazing experiences in the woods or at a concert with friends, and that's great. And then they go through a ceremony where we're just in a circle for 4, 5, 6 hours, largely in the dark, just listening, just sitting, breathing, and listening to music, and that's it. And they're like, it was so much deeper. I had no idea it could be that powerful. And I think that's just showing us the power of our own attention. Like, we can do that with anything. It's just about letting the things speak to us that already are. We just need to make the space to hear them. It's like clearing away the noise. And that's a choice. No one does that for you. You just choose to do that. And we're in a time of, like, information sickness. So it really shines a light on our whole life about, like, oh, I have to curate this. No one else is going to do it. No one else can do it.
Now, thinking about specifically, you said you're not a healer. Do you recommend people in specific areas that are healers based on doing this documentary, where people can go get the right, not just try mushrooms, but have the guidance of a spiritual person?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we highlight people in the film like Xochitl Ashe, who's a fifth generation medicine woman whose family's been doing this. She's in Mexico, doing that kind of legal retreats. I offer legal retreats in Costa Rica, but I just don't identify myself as a shaman. I'm more of a facilitator. And in many ways, these are just words. I think the calling really ultimately is about self-directed healing, and that's what we need on some level for this to work at scale, for us to have a real impact on the planet. Because, and I don't just mean with psychedelics, like we all need to take a little bit of charge of our own volition to be like, what can I do in my own life, and what are the things I can actually do to change? And it's probably some things right in front of you. It's not some grand, like, I need to go to some ashram in India. I mean, it might be like, I need to clean my room, once a week, and I could go back to therapy, or it's like, I need to exercise, or some combination. Like, I could be better to my friends. I mean, it's right. It's just sort of like the path for each of us is unique, and the point is, as Spring Washam says in the film, it's like, enter. Like, it's important, just enter.
All right. Paul, any other questions?
Yeah. East, what if there's a central message to what you're talking about today, exists, what is that? What would that be from Music for Mushrooms, kind of thing? What would you want people to get out of that documentary?
I hope that the subtext of the film inspires people to understand and feel that inner work matters, and in turn, you, the viewer, matters. Like, you're part of this solution, this great turning that we're in, and that like, the uniqueness of your life and your journey is participatory in all of our journeys here. And it's sort of just encouraging them to say, of all people, not people who have a particular type or tribe or affiliation. It's like, this is a human right. And so it's more about encouraging people just to engage and feel hopefully a little more empowered.
Okay. Frank, anything else to add?
I'm still trying to get my hands around the what does the psychedelics do in this therapy session? I mean, that you listen to music, that if you don't use the psychedelics and use your procedures and use music, how
Yeah.
does the psychedelics help?
Well, I look, there's many ways to roam, but I think we're talking about. I'm always interested in, like, what works even better, or like what makes it reliably more positive versus perhaps a bit negative or traumatic. And music seems to be a very, very powerful guide that we've been using for thousands of years, and we can now use it in a modern context, and perhaps do it in really creative ways with all these modern tools we have with music alone, to make the psychedelic experience kind of meet the times that we're in. And the times are urgent. The times are urgent right now. So it's not about, like, I think we do need all the tools that we have, psychedelics and otherwise. This could be one powerful tool in our tool belt as a people, and for some people, to make changes in their lives that they want to make, but they're struggling to make. So I just think music is in a particular alignment with psychedelics, and it's always been that way. And so part of what I'm trying to say is, like, let's bring it back into the conversation and into this modern psychedelic renaissance, and not ignore that. What is it doing? The science, one of the reasons it's important for us to do more scientific research and get more funding for that is so we can actually, like, see that on a scientific level and talk about it. Because right now it's been more anecdotal. People saying things like, "Oh, that was like 10 years of therapy in one night." Okay, cool. What's going on though? And we're starting to, look into what is actually happening in the brain and in the body and our psychology. But that's going to take time. Scientific research is slow and expensive, but we need to do it all.
What's the challenge of you as, what do you consider yourself, more music or a filmmaker?
Definitely a musician. I mean, I majored in film in school and got a fine arts degree, and I was a photographer as my first job. And so it's all been things I've been really interested in, but films are expensive and difficult to make. And so I'm just really was honored that this came into my life and was able to get support and investors to make it happen. It's an independent project, but we privately funded it. And I hope to be able to continue to work in this space, but we're just getting started with this. It's a larger conversation of, I mean, we had 200 hours of footage that we get to share, all this other stuff on social media and on our website, musicformushrooms.com. And we have so much to share. So personally, I'm just in this space right now, and I'm loving it.
Well, I think it's interesting. It's an intriguing concept. It's interesting. Do you feel, this is a really interesting question, that psychedelics, especially mushrooms, have any adverse effects on the body from what
No,
you've
I'm not a
reached?
doctor, so I mean,
Not a
I can't
doctor.
give medical advice. But
Yeah, like,
I mean, from a physical point of view, look, I'm not a doctor. I've read things like that they have the lower toxicity than coffee, but of course, look, that doesn't mean you might not have something going on with your body that's unique to you, whether it's a heart condition or otherwise. Of course, psychological conditions can be dangerous, and it's not a good idea for everyone to do work with psychedelics, especially if you have things like a family history of schizophrenia or mental illness, or if you're pregnant. There's many reasons why it might not be a good match for you. This is not a panacea for everyone. I just want to put that out there. And there's real psychological risk of emotional and psychological trauma that can happen from very difficult, profound journeys. That's kind of why I'm saying music can play a big role often in helping guide you through the process to help you not have something that's traumatic and it's more positive. All the time, no. But that's why I'm saying, like, if there's an album on Spotify or something and they can just hit play on that, and I have an album that's 6 hours long, start to finish, I mean, that's a pretty low bar of entry as opposed to like going to a retreat for thousands and thousands of dollars overseas. That's not approachable for most people. And they want help. They're looking for help. They might engage with these things. And I'm like, I have no influence on whether they do it or not. It's more like, hey, let's just give you some tools, some support.
all right, best place we can go again?
Musicformushrooms.com has all of, so we're having a theatrical release. We're going to be in theaters starting in New York City on September 13th, but we're all over the United States. We're doing a big national event on October 10th where we want to do it in a bunch of theaters at once too. And there's something powerful about coming together and experiencing this in the room, sharing those emotions together. Of course, it looks the best and sounds the best. So check it out. Come to a theater, get a ticket now, and I'll be at a lot of those events.
Well, congrats. I mean, from something small to something big, what you've been able to do, East.
It's crazy. It's like a mycelial mushroom growing underground. You don't even know what's going on, and you're like, "Wow, this thing's fruiting up all over the place." And um, but it's a shared journey, man. And I'm just looking forward to starting to share it with people. It's been many years in the making.
All right. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank
Good
you.
luck.
All right. That was a special simulcast of the Neil Haley